It was a disappointing season for the Raptors, who lost in the NBA play-in tournament, and it's finally time for Masai Ujiri's front office to start moving this team in the right direction. And they can do that by addressing these 5 major concerns heading into the offseason. Let's get into it. This is Amateur Hour Sports, the YouTube channel that is dedicated to Toronto Raptors content and that is less than 50 subs away from 14,000 on the channel. If you like the Raptors, then you know what to do. Other than the selection of Scottie Barnes in the 2021 draft, it's been a really poor 3 years from the Raptors front office. Yes, I concede that it can be difficult to operate a team after a championship run, especially the championship run that the Raptors had with players leaving, players aging, and your rookie contract players who performed so admirably in that championship run, well, all of a sudden they're not rookies and you have to start paying them and they start filling up your salary sheet for your team. So it really does become difficult to keep that whole team together. But even with that constraint in mind, it's been a really troublesome 3 years here with the Raptors front office losing players for nothing and not bringing in enough talent to replace them and not finding the development within their team to replace those guys. So it's time to start laying the foundation for possible future successes in this offseason. It's going to be a very difficult offseason ahead for the Raptors, but they need to get the ball moving, and it starts with, first of all, the head coach. It's going to be an incredibly difficult decision to make up your mind with what to do with head coach Nick Nurse. He has 1 year left on his current contract, and we're a little bit torn in his position. Many Raptors fans understand that Nick Nurse is an excellent coach in the NBA, but also, we understand that maybe it's time for a fresh start, and perhaps every coach does have their expiration date, and Nick Nurse has met his. And I think that this is really a problem that is weighing on Masai Ujiri and his front office here, and I kind of have some proof. This is going to be by far the longest Masai Ujiri has ever gone without giving his postseason media availability. Typically, he does it within a few days, other than the championship season. But this year, Masai Ujiri still has not given his postseason media availability, and it doesn't seem like it's coming in the next few days either. This seems like something that is going to be either taken care of at the end of this week or next week. And regardless, it is going to be a lot longer than he would usually wait in order to give his media availability. I think the reason that he's waiting so long is that him and his team are making a difficult decision as it comes to Nick Nurse. I mean, when Masai Ujiri sits down at that media availability, if the first question is not in relation to whether or not Nick Nurse is his head coach going forward, then I think all the people in that room asking questions have not done their job correctly. As I said, there's a variety of ways that you can look at the Nick Nurse situation. I myself am slowly starting to lean towards the side of replacing him. And the reason for that is, yes, he has 1 year left on his contract. You can kind of feel him out as we come to the start of next season. See how he's doing, see if you want to replace him, see if things are improving. If they're not, then you can make that replacement, and also you can think about replacements at the end of the season. But if it is true, the front office is a little bit sour with the way Nick Nurse has handled his own media availabilities as of late, then maybe use the entire offseason here to find a replacement, get that replacement into the team, and get that replacement to start working with this group of players, because you have all this time. You have a lot of time. You're not in the playoffs here. You have a full offseason ahead to work on making things better here. And if Nick Nurse, if it doesn't work out at the start of the season, if it doesn't work out at the end of the season, then you just have to completely restart this process. But I think this is a really good starting point to change things for this team. That is why it would be a good decision now to replace Nick Nurse. If you want to keep Nick Nurse and you're just confident that he is a great coach and he can turn things around, that is also okay. But the bottom line here, we can't let this fester for a period of time. Masai Ujiri needs to make this decision from Nick Nurse's future ASAP and get the ball rolling on the offseason. The second thing that needs to be addressed, and this is an incredibly difficult decision as well, but it's addressing the free agent issues with the team. There are 3 key free agents with the Raptors. We already know that. It's Jakob Poeltl, Fred VanVleet, and Gary Trent Jr., who are free agents right now. Well, Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., technically they're not free agents. They're on player options, but I am assuming, and I think it's a pretty safe assumption to say, that they are not going to be taking on those player options. They want to have extra security on their contracts. They want to start locking in that financial compensation. And to be honest, I cannot blame them in any way whatsoever. Jakob Poeltl is not on a player option, but he is also a complete and utter free agent at this point. So the Raptors need to decide, if they can bring them all back and if they want to bring them all back here. Masai Ujiri, right after the trade deadline, spoke about these contracts and was confident that he could bring back all 3 of these players. Now, it's going to be very difficult to do that, but there are certain ways around the salary here, especially when you have all 3 of these players on their bird rights. There are ways around it to make it possible. Now, I'm not sure the Raptors can bring back their entire core together with the upgrade in pay that Jakob Poeltl's about to get, the slight upgrade in pay that Gary Trent's about to get, and the upgrade in pay that Fred VanVleet is about to get. But if there are ways around it, you do need to decide if you want to bring them all back. Jakob Poeltl should be a lock to bring back. Absolutely, you need to bring that guy back, not just because you traded a first-round pick to get him at the trade deadline, but we saw the impact that he does have on this team. Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr., that becomes a little bit more difficult. If you can only keep one, I would imagine they side with Fred VanVleet because it's tough to replicate all of the ball handling that he provides for this team. And you might be thinking Scottie Barnes can do that. I'm not so sure. We'll talk about that later on in this video as we get to the Scottie Barnes segment, if you guys wait around for that. But Fred VanVleet brings a lot of the ball handling skills and the pull-up shooting with the ball handling and the point guard tendencies that this team needs. Gary Trent Jr., he's a good shooter. He provides shooting for this team. That's another need that this team needs to address here. But when he's not shooting well, he's not providing much to the team. And perhaps you can disperse that salary amongst a number of players rather than just one to fill out more of the needs for this team. Another need for this team is the depth. And if you let one of those players go, like Gary Trent Jr. or Fred VanVleet, you have a lot more flexibility in pay to find some more depth for this team. I think the biggest issue that plagued this team from the trade deadline onwards was the complete and utter lack of depth. Now, partially, you could put that on Nick Nurse for not instilling the confidence in those players, not giving them as consistent of minutes as you would like. But to that as well, it's not a good bench, and maybe they didn't deserve any additional minutes for this team. The depth has always been an incredibly strong suit of the Raptors. It was especially a strong suit as the Raptors continued to push in the playoffs before getting to that championship in 2019. But in that 2019 championship run, the depth was another big strength of the Raptors. Like, imagine having impactful players like Fred VanVleet, who was outstanding in the finals, and Serge Ibaka, who was outstanding in the finals. Imagine having those 2 guys coming off your bench, along with Norman Powell and also OG Anunoby, who was injured for that playoff run. Like, that was a deep team, and we completely lost our way with building this team with depth in mind. And we really do need to get back to that point in 2023 and 2024. There are certain ways you can do that. And additionally to the depth comes our 4th need to address. This kind of goes hand in hand with number 3, but it's to address the shooting needs of this team. Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. were basically providing all of the shooting to this team in the 2021-2022 season. So where the Raptors were thriving off of getting extra possessions, and you can see in the current NBA landscape, in the playoffs right now, there were a lot of teams who make an emphasis on getting extra possessions, crashing the glass, forcing turnovers. That's an emphasis that these playoff teams have. The Raptors have it as well, but why are the Raptors on the outside of the playoff picture looking in? Well, it has a lot to do with the fact that the Raptors were bottom 3 in three-point efficiency this season, and they were bottom 10 in attempts made. And if you go to non-garbage time sequences, I believe the Raptors were bottom 5 in the NBA in three-point field goal attempts. So the shooting dropped as from the team as a whole, but with so much relying on Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. to be the shooters for this team, when you have both of those guys regress in their shooting, it makes a big difference. So you can exploit the extra possessions to make your team successful, but you also need the shooting to go around with that to allow that vision and that tactical mindset to be at its best. And also to give these guys some help to not have so much of the burden on VanVleet and Trent, you need to provide additional shooting to this bench. The Raptors have, over the last 3 years, had one of the worst benches in the entire NBA. And yes, again, you can partially put a lot of that on Nick Nurse, but you can put a lot of it as well on the caliber of the players that are within this team. If you're a good player, the bar is not very high for the Raptors bench. If you're a good player coming off the bench, you are going to get minutes. And there are a lot of players like Juancho, like Simi Hailuk, like Yuta Watanabe, who had a lot of consistent minutes in the Raptors rotation, who could not lock down a role, who then saw their playtime drop before getting waived, before being allowed to leave as a free agent. Shooting is a deep concern for this team that needs to be addressed. And as much as we talked about the shooting and the depth being concerned, this also kind of segues us into the fifth need that needs to be addressed, and that is development. This goes once again hand in hand with number 4, the shooting, and it comes to the players on this team who can improve themselves as shooters. And right now, I'm particularly looking at Scottie Barnes. Scottie Barnes has blown us away with his talent so far. This most recent season, the Raptors and fans, we had some extraordinarily high expectations for this player, and he fell short of that. He had a good season, but he fell short of those sky-high expectations that we set. And I think that's more so our fault as fans and as the team for putting way too high of expectations on a sophomore player, expecting him to be emerging as potentially the number 1 player for this team in his second season. Like, this guy is only 21 years old. The sky is the limit. There's a lot of room for development, but what is an immediate need in his development is the shooting. We can't have Scottie Barnes out there on the court anymore being guarded like Draymond Green, being guarded like Ben Simmons. That just clogs up too much of the paint for our offensive players like Pascal Siakam or whoever are going to be our offensive players for next season. Even if it is the offensive player, Scottie Barnes, it just makes his game and the team's game so much easier if he is able to provide that extra floor space. And I will say, shooting near 30%, that's better than we expected it to be when he came into his NBA career, but it's his 3rd season. It's his next season before he's eligible for his extension, and we're thinking he's going to be getting a max contract for this team. That's the expectation, at least at this present point. We need him to start showing that he can knock down some shots. I'm not saying pull up off the dribble, but I need this guy to ensure players actually care about him on the perimeter. I need players to care about him on the outside and actually have to guard him. Because at this present point, I spoke about earlier, Fred VanVleet is the point guard, the ball handler. Why Scottie Barnes can't replicate what Fred VanVleet does as a point guard? Now, I think many people are imagining Scottie Barnes. Well, he played point guard in college, so he can play point guard in the NBA. You don't need Fred VanVleet because Scottie Barnes can play that role. I'll tell you why Scottie Barnes can't play that role. In a full court setting, 100%, Scottie Barnes can initiate the offense. He is a very good passer, reads the game very well. That works. So when you get bogged down in a half court setting, look at the way defenses are guarding Scottie Barnes. As I said, like Ben Simmons, like Draymond Green, they don't respect him. Like sometimes Russell Westbrook. They basically can just help off of him. And once he starts to get close to the rim in the paint, that's when you go and initiate and actually play some defense there. So that just clogs up so much of the offense, and when it's clogging up all of the space on the offense, that limits the amount of passing lanes, and it limits the amount of opportunities Scottie Barnes has to be a playmaker in those settings. What's different for Fred VanVleet? Well, number 1, I think he's a bit more crafty as a point guard. Number 2, he has a pull-up shot. Even though it wasn't great this season, and its efficiency was down, his shooting numbers from 3 in particular were down, people still respected that part of his game and played up on him. So when he was operating in the pick and roll with Jakob Poeltl, there were defenders there. They had to switch off. That generated movement from the defense. That generated open spaces that allowed Fred VanVleet to exploit. And we saw with Fred VanVleet's assist numbers all throughout the season, but in particular, post-trade deadline when he was averaging just under 10 assists per game, around 9 assists per game, we saw the amount of space that was opening up. That space just wouldn't be there with Scottie Barnes as the point guard. Now, it's different when if he's adding in a pull-up jumper at some point in his career. I think he's still better served being a forward for his development, getting the most out of him. I think that comes in the forward position. But the bottom line is, development-wise, Scottie Barnes, we need him to take a little bit of a jump from the catch-and-shoot shooting standpoint to provide that extra space to the team and extra space to his game in particular. So, 5 needs that the Raptors front office have to address in this upcoming offseason. If they can address these 5 things, or at least address 4 of these things and get it done, get the ball moving and start to turn this team around, that will put us in a much better position going into next season. It may not be a playoff season, it may not be a successful season on the court, but it could be a successful offseason and starting to regain that foundation for future successes. What do you guys make of the points in this video? Do you have anything to add? Do you disagree with anything I said? Let me know in the comments down below, because that is it for me for today. Drop a like if you did enjoy this video. It goes a long way to supporting the channel, and make sure you subscribe to Amateur Hour Sports for more Raptors content like this in videos, live streams, and shorts. We're so close to 14,000 subs. You can help me get there, and in return, you get all this great Raptors content. That's a fair trade.